The Smith Wesson Model 66 Combat Magnum is one of my favorite revolvers ever, but they were tough to find for a while once production ended in 2005. 2 years ago, Smith & Wesson relaunched the Combat Magnum with the slightly redesigned 4-inch Model 66-8. This year, they added the 2 3/4-inch version that's a little more friendly for concealed carry, and that's the model we're looking at today. Every version of the Model 66 is a stainless 6-shot 357 Magnum with adjustable sights built on the Smith & Wesson medium-size K-frame. It was first introduced in 1970 as a stainless steel alternative to the original blued steel Combat Magnum, the Model 19. Both were extremely popular police sidearms through the last few decades of the 20th century. Like most revolvers at the time, the Model 66 was usually found with a 4-inch barrel, although 6-inch and 2.5-inch models were in regular production as well. There were also some limited runs of a 3-inch model offered sporadically over the years, and that's my favorite version of the 66. Some of you might have seen the video I did on my modified 3-inch Model 66-6 a couple of years ago with the somewhat tongue-in-cheek title, The Best Revolver in the World. I like the 3-inch barrel partly because it's more concealable than the 4-inch, but still long enough to allow room for a full-length ejector rod. The old 2.5-inch models have a short ejector rod like this one, which doesn't eject all the empty casings quite as reliably when you're reloading. The new Model 66-8 also has a full-length ejector rod, even though the barrel is only 2 3/4 inches long, and that's made possible by a new lockup design. On the old models, the cylinder locks in the frame with this pin here in the extractor star and also at the tip of the ejector rod. So the barrel has to be at least as long as the ejector rod plus the spring-loaded locking bolt. But check out the same spot on the new 66. There's no locking bolt, and that's because it's been replaced by this ball detent on the frame that locks into the crane. This is supposedly a more secure locking point. It allows the barrel to be a little shorter, and it also solves the occasional problem of the ejector rod backing itself out under recoil and locking the cylinder closed. And just above there, you can see a second design improvement. On the old K-frames, the forcing cone was flat at the bottom, and that was a weak point that could occasionally crack, usually after firing a lot of high-velocity Magnum loads. The new forcing cone is thicker, which should eliminate that weakness in the design. Unfortunately, while Smith & Wesson may have made some durability improvements, there's a lot about this gun I'm not real excited about. Of course, it's got the internal lock mechanism where the revolver sole leaks out. I'm not really a fan of that, but that's old news. There are some other issues to talk about. Let's start with the way it's configured. Traditionally, short-barreled K-frames have been prized for having the shooting characteristics of a full-size revolver in a package that's practical for concealed carry. But neither of these advantages are easy to see in this latest version of the Combat Magnum. The rubber stocks are large and cling to clothing, which compromises concealability. And the small rear sight notch and the unreasonably heavy 15-pound trigger make the gun difficult to shoot well. The challenge of shooting the Model 66-8 was apparent when I ran it through the 9-stage Lucky Gunner practical handgun test that we've been using for all of our reviews this year. My best score out of the 3 runs with this gun was 47.87. That's the worst score out of all the handguns I've tested so far, including a few small frame snubbies and pocket pistols. Compared to my Model 66-6, I only dropped a couple of additional points in target penalties with the new revolver, but thanks to the smaller sights and the heavy uneven trigger, I had to slow way down to get those hits, and my raw time was almost 10 seconds slower. Mechanical accuracy testing was a little more encouraging. From a 25-yard bench rest, I fired 2 5-round groups with each of 6 different loads in .38 Special and .357 Magnum. The average group size was right around 2 to 3 inches for all but one of those loads, which is not bad at all. My criticisms about how this gun is set up are mostly subjective, but there are also some quality control issues I feel obligated to point out. Smith & Wesson was kind enough to loan us this revolver to review, but this is actually the second one they sent. I had to send back the first one. Something was not fitted properly, and a part of the yoke was rubbing against the frame, which made the cylinder really hard to open and close, and even started making the action feel a little sluggish. When I told Smith & Wesson about it, they apologized and quickly sent me this one. It has worked fine so far, but it's also a far from perfect sample. There is a large burr here on the cylinder release latch. Even though it's just a cosmetic issue, this is the kind of sloppiness you don't expect to see on a gun with an $850 MSRP. So with all these complaints, you would probably assume that I am not recommending this gun, but really, it depends on what you're looking for. If you want a new mid-size revolver that's going to be ready to go right out of the box, I would not buy this one. You would probably be better off with something like the 3-inch Wiley Clap edition of the Ruger GP100. It's a bit larger than the 66, but it's an overall better execution of the mid-size carry revolver concept. However, if you're like me and you just really prefer the size and handling characteristics of the short-barreled K-frames, the new Model 66 might not be a bad starting point. My 66-6 is one of my favorite guns, but when I first got it, it really wasn't much different from this one. It left the factory in 2004, so it's not exactly a shining example of old-world craftsmanship. It has evidence of the same modern automation and cost-cutting shortcuts that Smith & Wesson revolvers have been criticized over for years. Even so, it's still a fantastic shooter. I just had to spend a little extra time and money on it. I think this new 66 has the same potential. To turn this into a decent carry revolver, at minimum, I personally would make the following changes. I'd replace the oversized rubber stocks with something more concealable like these Altamont wood boot grips. I'd replace the mainspring with a Wolf standard weight power rib spring to even out the double action trigger. There are better ways to improve the action, but the Wolf spring is a cheap fix that's still a huge improvement. On the new 66, Smith & Wesson has switched to using a shorter rear sight blade, so the notch is shallower and it's harder to pick up the front sight. I'd swap that out for a standard height rear sight blade. And the front sight with the plastic red insert also has to go. They wash out really easily in a lot of lighting conditions and can be tough to see. An affordable upgrade would be a red fiber optic sight from Dawson. That's a little over $100 worth of modifications on top of a gun that's currently retailing somewhere between $700 and $775. Is that worth it for a modern Smith & Wesson revolver? Again, it depends on your priorities. With an older pre-lock 66, you get something that looks and feels more refined and comes with pride of ownership. But you'll need to plan to spend at least $1,000, and you still might want to change the grips or the sights. With a new 66, you'll save some money even after you fix it up, and you'll have better spare parts availability, and it might be a little more durable. So for fans of the K-frame, for the time being, it looks like you're stuck choosing between the benefits of yesterday's craftsmanship or today's technology. It's going to be really tough to get both.